Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Wrigley, and I'd like to welcome you to this year's annual Ethics Awareness Week. It is the time of year when we focus on the importance of ethical choices and ethical decision making. You've heard me say before, the most important thing that we have to guard is the public's trust. We cannot carry out our ultimate mission of educating more Georgians unless we have the support and trust of the public. So in our everyday decisions, yours and mine, we need to keep it at the forefront of those decisions, protecting and advancing the public trust. This year's speaker is an excellent example of someone who has done that in his career, both in the private sector and in the public sector. He's Rodney Bullard, who is the Vice President for Corporate Social Responsibility at Chick-fil-A. He's also Executive Director of the Chick-fil-A Foundation. In those roles, he helps lead Chick-fil-A's efforts in the community around philanthropy, social responsibility, and sustainability. Rodney's past suits him well to be our speaker today. He went to undergraduate school at the United States Air Force Academy, and we thank him for his service. He later earned a law degree at Duke, and then ultimately got a real education by getting an MBA at the Terry College from the University of Georgia. In the past, Rodney has served in the United States Air Force. He's worked for the Justice Department, and he worked at NASA. His career exemplifies someone who understands trust, who understands the value of ethical decision making, and we are delighted that Rodney is willing to speak to us this year. So, Rodney, I'll hand it off to you. Thank you.
Chancellor Wrigley, it is an honor to be able to speak to the University System of Georgia and also have the opportunity to connect with the Board of Regents.
I am a native Georgian. This is home for me. And now I get a chance to work for a native company in Chick-fil-A, and that's amazing. But I'll tell you, my beginning with Chick-fil-A was not so ethical. I grew up in Decatur, Georgia, near South DeKalb Mall, and my initial experience with Chick-fil-A was going to the mall at the age of around 6 or 7. And I noticed that outside of those Chick-fil-A's, they had trays of nuggets, and they would give those nuggets away as samples. And so I would go take a sample, I would put it in my mouth, I would walk down the mall, and then I would come back and I would take another sample. I'll put it in my mouth, and I would do that 3 or 4 times until my mother said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, they're giving away for free." She said, "No, they gave you one for free. After that, you're stealing." And I realized at an early age that ethics was important because my mother then made me do a book report on the founder of Chick-fil-A. And so I got a chance to learn about Truett Cathy, S. Truett Cathy, the legendary founder of Chick-fil-A. Now, fast forward years, I've gone into the Air Force, I've worked at the Pentagon, I've worked at the White House, and now I'm back in Atlanta, Georgia. And I had met Dan Cathy, Truett's eldest son. And Dan and I got into a conversation that led to me being hired at Chick-fil-A and led to me starting the Chick-fil-A Foundation and Corporate Social Responsibility at Chick-fil-A. But I'll never forget that when I got there, I wanted to meet Truett Cathy because years ago, when I was stealing nuggets, I learned about Truett Cathy. And now Truett was in his 90s, and I was going to get a chance to meet Truett Cathy. And so one day I got a note that said, Truett wanted to meet me. And I go into Truett's office, and it's this wonderful office. Literally, we called it the treehouse. And Truett was only yay big, but he was a giant man in spirit. And I walk up to Truett, and Truett said, "Rodney, I want to tell you 2 things." He said, "One, I want you to understand that my son hired you, but you don't work for him. You work for me. And 2, he said, I also want you to understand that this company was built on service. It was built on integrity, and it was built on taking care of people. And that has never been lost on me." And I think about really the ideals of what the university system is really doing. And I think about how you are impacting the lives of our most precious resource, our children, our minds, and our futures. And I think about integrity. I think about respect. I think about all of those things that are really important. I think about a Chick-fil-A restaurant. And when you go into a Chick-fil-A restaurant, we hope that you feel the hospitality. We hope you feel the connection. And I know that you all want to ensure that that also happens when students come into your classrooms, when students come into your campuses, when you have a chance to interact with students, when you have a chance to connect with them. I think about this as well. I hearken back to March 30th, 2017. That was a day in which I was driving very leisurely down I-85. I live here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I-85 traverses right through the middle of the city. And on that day, really that evening, I was traversing down I-85 and I saw this big billow of smoke. And as I got closer, I began to see more and more smoke. And at some point, I thought that we had been attacked, that the city was on fire. And I didn't know what to do. And at some point, I was directed to turn around and go home. And I later realized that a fire had been set underneath the I-85 bridge. And I learned that we were unable to get across that bridge and use that bridge because of that fire. And some lessons that I've taken from that day. One, the lesson I've taken is that we all need bridges in our lives. That we don't always know or recognize the importance of bridges until they're not there. And oftentimes when we don't have a bridge, there is a chasm. And sometimes there's smoke and there's friction, but we always think that what's on the other side is more dangerous than it probably is, more different than it probably is, more of an issue. I think about that as I think about the roles that you all play, that you're literally bridges for young minds, that you're literally bridges to the future for our children, and that the integrity, the strength of that bridge was in question on that day in two ways. One, it wasn't even there, but two, the integrity, not just in the honesty and the reality of the bridge, but the ability to support and uphold us. Your integrity, your honesty, your truth is on example every day for the students in this system, for the parents, for the citizens of Georgia. You are a bridge for so many. It is a role that you should not take lightly. It is a role that, frankly, we don't give you enough credit for. It is a role that we thank you for. And in that, it is a heavy lift because we know what happens when we don't have education. We know what happens when children aren't able to get where they should be. And we know that we can't get to the future. Georgia can't get to the future that it should have. I'll leave you with one more story. When I was young, probably about the same age as I was when I was stealing chicken nuggets from South DeKalb Mall, I was in first grade and I was attending a prestigious private school in Atlanta, Georgia. And I won't name the school because it's still in existence. It's a wonderful school. But at some point, when I was in class, my teacher said, I'm not quite sure about this young man's ability to proficiently go through school. And so she called my mother. She called my mother and said, Mrs. Bullock, Rodney's a fine young man, but he's not reading on grade level. And we're not sure whether or not we should keep him in the class he's in. We would like to put him in a developmentally slower class. And my mother, an educator herself, had to make a very tough decision. She had to think about what was she going to do with her son. And what would the future look like based off of this decision for her son? So she moved me from that school. She put me in a less prestigious private school that no longer is in existence. It was in Decatur, Georgia. It was small. And she put me in that school in the middle of the school year, around this time. And I remember going there. And I went there and there were these cinder block gray walls. Now, my bio says that I was a prosecutor, so I put people in jail, but I'd never been to jail. And I surely had never seen jail as a first grader. But I can tell you to this day, this is what prison felt and looked like to me. These gray cinder block walls. And I'm walking in as a first grader, and I'm definitely afraid not only of the walls, but also the concern that they will find out that I'm not reading on grade level. So out walks this little lady by the name of Mrs. Janie Adams. Mrs. Adams was only yay tall, and I was taller than her even in first grade. I tell people that she was the very first gnome that I ever met. And so I looked at Mrs. Adams and I fell out crying. And at some point, Mrs. Adams pulled me back into the classroom and she cajoled me to sit down, and I did so. And by the end of the class, I got a little comfortable. But by the end of the school year, Mrs. Adams too called my mother. She called my mother and she said, "Mrs. Bullard, Rodney is a fine young man, but he's not reading on grade level." She said, "But I see potential in Rodney. I see that he might have a future." And she said, "I would like to tutor him for the summer." And she did just that. Now, I'll be honest with you, that summer, I thought it was horrible. I thought I was giving up my summer. And what I now realize as an adult, that Mrs. Adams was giving up her summer. I realized that Mrs. Adams was a bridge for me, because at the end of the summer, I was reading 2 and 3 grade levels ahead of my peers. Mrs. Adams was a bridge, but even more so, Mrs. Adams was a hero. And I want you to remember this, that every day you have the opportunity to be a Mrs. Adams for somebody, to be a bridge for somebody, and that the ethic of your work, the ethic of understanding the value of your work, the ethic of being trustworthy, the ethic of coming to work every day and being responsible and respecting the minds that you are entrusted with, that is the most powerful element of heroism. And that every day you get the opportunity to be somebody's hero. Mrs. Adams was my bridge and she was my hero. And I respect the job that you do for so many. Georgia is dependent upon you. And I thank you for what you do. Continue to be heroes for this state. God bless.
Greetings. My name is John Futchko, and I serve as the University System of Georgia Vice Chancellor for Organizational Effectiveness. I'd like to add my thanks to the chancellors, to Mr. Rodney Bullard, and let him know how much we appreciate him sharing his message, and also for his service to our country and his service to our community. To my colleagues in the university system, I would encourage you to use this week to reflect on the ethical component of what we do and how we do it. We have a code of conduct, we have ethics policies. I certainly would encourage you to familiarize and refamiliarize yourself with those requirements. But I would also offer up to you that nothing substitutes for good judgment and a servant's heart towards serving the students and remaining focused on our mission. I'd like to thank you certainly for your work on behalf of the university system and your institution, and wish you a good rest of your week. Thank you.